Good morning, friends. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and here we are. So let's begin with another prayer. Another prayer means let's pray again, as we ought to be doing all the time. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, we open our hearts and our minds to your transforming presence. We are your children, living in this world as best we can, but always dependent on your guiding wisdom. Don't leave us to our own devices, because we will become lost and confused, but be always with us, protecting us, inspiring us, teaching us through our experiences in your wisdom, what it is that the heart really longs for, and how we can bring into our hearts thy perfect love. Om, peace. Amen. Well, we've started on a cycle about our masters, the gurus of this path. So it seems like I might as well just sort of go through them day by day, because it seems like a very enjoyable thing to me to do that. So I want to talk today about Jesus. This is a very interesting time, this particular lineage. Generally speaking, uh, a master, an avatar incarnates. Most of the time, he has a known guru, but not always. Sometimes his guru is either unknown. He may appear not to have a guru, but that is inconsistent with Sanatana Dharma. So it just may be that the guru is not visible to anyone but the avatar, or is not relevant for some reason for the avatar to bring forward who and how and what the guru is. Every master teaches the same perception of God, but they teach it according to the needs of their disciples, the needs of the time, and the unique window that that particular bubble of divinity represents. But the fact that in this particular lineage, there's 5 masters, and Yogananda himself came, said he was the last in the line of gurus. It's a very important point to understand, is that he could not possibly be the last guru in this lineage, because that would mean that no one would ever become God realized. Because in order to become God realized, we have to also help free others. This is something that Master told Swamiji. Master said to Swamiji, in order to become liberated, you have to free 6 others. Now, free, if you start saying, well, then, all of those people have to be completely liberated, and that means all of them have to free 6 others, and then all those 6 have to free 6 others. Pretty soon, everybody is frozen until everybody is liberated. So that's not actually what he meant, but the way Swami expressed it was that you have to take 6 others as far as they are able to be taken. You have to plant them firmly on the path. You have to elevate their lives. Who knows? I couldn't really say, except that the other explanation Swami took off the table. But Master had told Swamiji that in order to be free, you have to free 6 others. So when Sister Gyanamata passed away, and Master said that she was completely liberated, Swami didn't even express it. He just thought it. Like, but you're the guru here, thinking about Master. How could she be liberated in this ashram where you're the last in the line of the gurus? And Master answered Swami's question by saying, oh, she had disciples. Just like that. Oh, she had disciples. Master was there. He was living. He was the last in the line. But Gyanamata had disciples. And that is completely consistent with Sanatana Dharma, because the guru's responsibility is to lift us to God realization. And then even if the gratitude is always there, because this one has been the instrument of your liberation, you actually become equals in your relationship. Swamiji talked about toward the end of his life, he had a very significant dream with Master, but one of the elements of that dream that Swamiji commented on was that the relationship was not as Swami had experienced it when he was with Master in the body, where Swami was the young, very young disciple and Master was the guru. He said he and Master were equals, and it wasn't irreverent the way Swami said that. It's just that we were both working for we were working side by side for the salvation of the world, and that is exactly how it would be. The only thing that keeps us distant from the guru is our incapacity to share their state of consciousness. Swamiji said he was sitting once when Master was still living, he was sitting at Master's feet, and he was just lost in the reverie of how glorious Master was and how much love was flowing. And Swamiji prayed inside himself. He wanted to give back to Master, and he prayed, "Teach me to love you as you love me." And then afterwards, again, as Master would do, because he, to quote his own words, knew every thought that every one of his disciples was thinking. I said to Swami, "Is that still true?" Swami just said, "Of course," just like that. So Master knew what Swami had prayed, and so he said to Swamiji, he said, "How can the cup expect to hold the whole ocean? First the cup must expand to be the whole ocean." And so if Swami wanted to love Master the way Master loved him, Swami had to become his Master. But that's inevitably what we will do. We must do. If not, this path is not valid. So we have to, each of us, attain liberation, which, according to Master, also means that we will turn and we will help uplift others. It's very interesting. We make mysterious this relationship with the Guru because it is mysterious. It's impossible to really grasp it. When I've always had my first relationship is with Swamiji, and by that I mean my primary relationship spiritually has always been with Swamiji. And for most of Swamiji's life, he would say, Master is the Guru. But he also said in very clear terms that he's our link. For most people at Ananda, I am the link to Master. Now, I think that continues to be true, but I'm speaking from what he said. So sometimes people, because at that time it was a big question, is Master your Guru or is Kriyananda your Guru? My answer was always this: the difference between me and Swamiji is real obvious to me. The difference between Swamiji and Master is not so obvious to me. So I'm going to just close the distance between me and Swami, and then I'll worry about the next step. I feel like I'm doing exactly what I know I'm supposed to be doing, and Swamiji will take me wherever I'm supposed to go. So for some people, these are big questions, but in my own mind, I think we ourselves don't have as clear an understanding of it as the words would make us seem, because you have one guru, you have that guru for all time. That guru is appointed by God. So when you have 5 gurus, I can't put all that together, except that I think we impose personality limits on these figures in ways that it's our understanding that is confused. And if there appears to be any confusion, it's not because there is, it's because we don't understand it. And Babaji was Krishna, he said in a previous incarnation, and at the end of his life, Swami was saying that Master was Jesus. So you have 5 gurus, but you actually only have 4. And SRF puts a separate picture of Krishna on the altar, but Master never did. They did that after Master died. Master only had Babaji, because Babaji represented Krishna. And the SRF prayer was changed after Master passed to say, Lord Krishna, Mahavatar Babaji as 2. But Master always said Babaji Krishna. So there was a certain point in Ananda history, which I describe in Light Bearer, in which Swamiji went back to doing it the way Master did it. So Babaji Krishna, we don't say Jesus Yogananda, and I don't think we ever would, because the whole incarnation of Jesus stands on its own. But I'm saying all these things to say, well, I asked Swamiji a question once, and I actually think it was about Babaji and about Jesus and about Master. That's my recollection, although I don't clearly remember the question. But I asked him something. He was sitting at the breakfast table, and I always ambush Swami at the breakfast table. Now I appreciate how rude it was of me to ask him these kinds of questions when he was trapped over his breakfast and only wanted to just eat his meal in peace. But I never respected that. Please forgive me, sir. I just never got it. Okay. But I asked him some question like that. And Swami was always very deliberate, and he very deliberately set down his utensils. Then he looked at me, and those of you on camera can see this. He just put his arms in the air and in a very elaborate way, in complete silence, shrugged his shoulders, then relaxed, then picked up his, his utensils and continued his breakfast. And then in another context, he said, some mysteries will not be revealed until we have exited from this world. Or some mysteries will not be revealed until we attain God realization. So I think the mystery of 5 avatars, 5 gurus, that's how Master often called them, although also he would do, and these are just nuances, that over many years you have a lot of time to think about these things. If you hear Master pray, he never says his own name. He never says, and me, Paramhansa Yogananda. I mean, it's ludicrous even to think about it. But he says, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, Guru Preceptor. And so Guru Preceptor, he must have been referring to himself, that he was the link. But he was the link through him. And that's how I always felt about Swami, through him. Another way of putting it, speaking of Swamiji particularly, was that Master was the king of the country, but Swamiji was the governor of the particular province that I lived in, or the prince who had been put in charge. And out of respect for the king, I paid attention to the prince. It's not pleasing to the king to disregard the prince. So they also say, it has been said in the principles of Sanatana Dharma, that you're not more loyal to the expressions of the divine that have come earlier by refusing to acknowledge the presence of the divine in the moment. So again, it's all very complicated, which leads us, and I will eventually talk about Jesus this morning, I presume, even to an understanding of why we have 5 gurus. Because really, in most ashrams, you don't. You just have your guru. And your guru has a guru, and your param guru is the word for it. Your reverential. Now, Swamiji has raised a very interesting theory about this line of masters, and he talked about how many historical or spiritual figures masters said were previous incarnations of various ones of these gurus. Rajasi Janakananda was King Janaka in a previous lifetime. Lahiri Mahashaya was Kabir. Krishna was Babaji. Master himself was Arjuna. And we don't know, there's probably many others that we just don't know about. There may even be others that Master said. Swami raised a very interesting question. He said, perhaps this group of masters is responsible for this planet, or bear some major responsibility for this planet. And they've just been incarnating forever, just taking this planet through its various yuga cycles. And at a time, and when these masters incarnate, often other masters incarnate with them. When Jesus was a baby, now I'm talking about Jesus, when Jesus was a baby, Master said the 3 wise men, the Master just stated this. He actually stated it in his dictated version of the SRF lessons, the first lesson. It's not what you get now if you sign up. But Master said, when Jesus was a baby in the manger in Israel, or whatever it was called at that time, and the 3 wise men came from the east, he said it was Babaji, Lahiri, and Sri Yukteswar. Now, it's a little confusing because John the Baptist appears also to have been Sri Yukteswar, and he was born just before Jesus was born. So people, astute readers noticing this contradiction would ask, how is it possible? Swami's answer was quite simply, one, a master can incarnate in two bodies at the same time. The second is, was the three wise men really a physical visitation? Did they come in their astral bodies? Did whoever Sri Yukteswar was just manifest, like in a vision, manifest a body like Babaji made the Himalayan temple? I mean, I know it gets pretty far out. It gets very far out. And you don't have to go with me all the way to there. But there you have it. Master says the three wise men were those three. And that the lost years of Jesus, because Jesus is in the Bible when he was 12, and then he shows up again when he's 33. And there's not a word about all those missing years. Now, think about it. Now, think about these as human beings. Do you think the disciples never said to Jesus, "Where have you been?" Do you think Jesus never talked about all those years of his life? I mean, a master incarnates, and his life is the example. He's showing us what it means to be an avatar. Otherwise, why does he incarnate? Why does he take a physical body? And this is one of the things that I want to talk about, is how the life of each one of these avatars fills out our picture of what it means truly to live for God. So here's Jesus. He's taken the trouble to take a body, which he didn't have to do. He's taken the trouble to take a body. He only lives 33 years. There's an 18-year gap in his life. Do you think Jesus never mentioned it? Or do you think no disciple ever asked? I mean, if you think of these people as human, and because I've had the experience of living with Swamiji, having my life be closely intertwined with his, because I've heard Swamiji talk about Master, because there's a book called The Divine Trilogy, which is written by Durga Mata, who Master said was second in realization only to Gyanamata. So she was a very, very advanced disciple. And her book is very interesting because it's very casually written. It's not carefully edited. It's not carefully written. It's more like just a diary. But she really just talks about living with Master, and she came like shortly after Mount Washington was founded in the 20s, and lived with Master. She outlived Master by a number of years, like by 20, 30 years maybe. So she was a young woman, and she lived with Master for that entire life. She was very close with him, and she traveled with him. She was with him at Mount Washington, and she presents a life that was, well, the only thing I can describe, it was very much like the life we had with Swamiji. And I remember saying to Swami at one point, essentially, you've modeled your life after Master's. You do what he did. Isn't that right? And Swami said, of course. And I said, and what you refrain from doing is in the way that you relate and so on, is the way Master did it. And Swami said again, of course. Like, what else? What other standard would I use? And so the life that Durga Mata describes in this book called The Divine Trilogy, I think is what it's called. It's not an easily accessible book, but you can find it here and there. It's a wonderful book for those who are dedicated to Master, because it gives you such a clear picture of what he was really like. It's not filtered by any institutional imperatives. It's just that picture of her life, and also of Rajasi, because Master gave her the responsibility of taking care of Rajasi. And what you see is his life was his message. And that's certainly what I found with Swamiji. The way he lived was telling us what it means to be devoted to God. Because you see, it's very confusing. Because we get these words, and sometimes the words are edited, sometimes they're filtered, sometimes they're taken out of context. Just this morning on an earlier broadcast, someone asked a question. Master said you should never talk about your inner experiences. Well, if we never talk about them, how will we learn their deeper meaning? I said, well, Master, I'm sure Master didn't say, never talk about your inner experiences. Master said, be mindful about how you talk about your inner experiences. Even if he used the word never, you have to also use your common sense to understand what he meant. Obviously, you should present them to those who have the wisdom and the impersonal wisdom to help you. Why would you keep it a secret from them? But he said, don't scatter your pearls before swine, is what he was really saying. So the words of a teacher can be very confused, especially because they get filtered. But the example of the life tells us, how did they deal with adversity? How did they relax? How did they relate to their friends? How did they regard themselves? How did they deal with ill health? What did they say about, their own life experiences? There's just countless things. So it's impossible to imagine that those 18 years were not known to the disciples. And in fact, and I believe this is true, those portions were taken out of the Bible. And now actually this is getting to be common knowledge. I rather enjoy this, because what Swami said, what Master said, was that about the age of 12, and here's what Master actually said. It was traditional to arrange a marriage at that point. Whether the marriage was consummated at that time or a few years later, but that was the point at which a betrothal would be arranged. And Jesus didn't want to have any part of it. And so he left. He just left. I mean, they tried to arrange marriages for Master. 3 times they tried to arrange marriages for Master. He would have no part of it. So even if the family is enlightened, nonetheless, these things happen. These are mysteries. I'm going to imitate Swami Kriyananda. I really don't know. I have no idea how this works. But Master said Jesus just picked up and left. And Master said he returned the visit of the 3 wise men. He just went to India. They say that he went also to Tibet, but the countries were all different at that time. And he studied. He had a sadhana, and he had spiritual teachers. He had gurus. He was completely consistent with Sanatana Dharma. Now, Christianity evolved in such a way as to be inconsistent with Sanatana Dharma, because Jesus was the only Son of God who was just given to us by God's mercy. There was no path of self-realization. There was no reincarnation, although reincarnation was also taken out of the New Testament. But the church developed. There was no reincarnation. There was just Jesus. And pieces of it are absolutely true. And Christianity is a true religion. And great saints are created out of Christianity, because Jesus is an avatar and he doesn't care about theology. He cares about devotion. But they didn't want Jesus to have studied with anyone, because that was inconsistent with their idea of him. So he couldn't have a guru, and he definitely couldn't have gone to India to study. Now, this is all Kali Yuga descending, bear in mind. So it's just getting worse and worse and darker and darker. And even when it hits its nadir, it's not very good. But Master said Jesus went to India, lived in India for 18 years. So he had actually a much longer life in India than he ever had with his own, in his birthplace, with what became Christianity. And he studied, they say, and there's traditions that are very valid, in the Himalayas, in Varanasi. He went to, not to Pune, not what the place I mean, where the Jagannath temple is, Puri, where the Jagannath temple is. And he also had a ministry. He helped many, 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 many people. And he taught Sanatana Dharma through his incarnation. So it's a terrible, but nowadays there's many films that have been made. I even saw a children's book. I saw a children's book published by a Catholic publisher that had Jesus at the age of 12 getting on a boat with Joseph of Arimathea. These are other traditions that I believe are true, who was a very wealthy merchant. And Jesus got on the boat with Joseph of Arimathea and traveled around the world, connecting with the wise brothers, the wise brotherhood, the brotherhood of sages, the brotherhood of saints. And this is a beautiful children's book published by Catholics. I think they don't know what's in that book, but I loved it, because we're in a new age and the consciousness is rising and people are beginning to understand that there's something very, very different going on here. And Jesus assigned his disciple Thomas to go back to India. As soon as Jesus died, Thomas went to India. And Thomas's entire, he was one of the 12 apostles. His entire a life was spent bringing the teachings of Jesus to India from the south. And he was martyred eventually because he antagonized the priests. Jesus also antagonized the priests because he was restoring. He was against dogma, and he was restoring the true teachings of Sanatana Dharma. Jesus was crucified for it in one reality. Thomas was martyred for it in another. Jesus argued with the priests in Puri because they were too orthodox and not genuine enough in their reality. So now coming back to all of this, let's see. Oh yes, this is about the role that these masters have played for a very, very long time in the history of this planet, and the power of this particular spiritual family. Now, please don't hear any of this as being sectarian, because there is, I'm sure, the story of multiple, numerous, innumerable, I would like to think, equally spiritual, powerful spiritual families. This is not a competition. This is when great actors come together, an ensemble performance of great actors, an all-star sporting event, is because they come from all different leagues and all different teams. The actors come from all different countries, and everybody who's really good can work together to make really great things happen. And they don't care about the details. We're all on the same side, just trying to move something glorious forward. And when Swamiji writes, as I read yesterday, from the path about this enormous spiritual nation, one of the ways that the spiritual nation has been built is because these masters have reincarnated repeatedly, and they've brought their disciples with them. And then the disciples themselves begin to form sort of little um, countries within countries, communities within communities. And all of that power works together. And then many of us, and it's the only way I can think about it, many of us become sort of part of the troupe. It's Swamiji deciding to incarnate was, I'm sure, the deciding factor for a great many of us, because our destiny is hooked to his. And that's why I sort of speak of him in that way. Our destiny is hooked to his. In fact, I said to Swamiji once, only half joking, because I was growing very tired of early Dwapara. It's really a very tiresome time to be on the planet. And actually, it's worth remembering, Dwapara is one of the most insecure ages to live in. Kali Yuga is a little gross, to put it mildly, but it's stable. There's not a lot of change in Kali Yuga. Things just sit there. Well, Kali Yuga descending and the destruction and the barbarians sweeping through and destroying it all, that's a lot of change. But things move slower. I was impressed reading just some article in an Indian newspaper. There had been 5 generations of itinerant storytellers in India. For 5 generations, the family had just traveled through India to the various villages, telling these great stories, and then from father to son, from father to son. But of course, then comes Dwapara Yuga, comes radio, comes television, and all of a sudden, the itinerant storyteller, there's no place for him anymore. It's just gone. So after 5 generations, the present generation was driving taxis in New Delhi. I mean, think about that. That's the difference between Kali Yuga and Dwapara Yuga. One generation, it completely flips over. And in Dwapara Yuga, we have the technology to destroy the planet, and we haven't yet developed the moral awareness not to do it. So it's a terribly insecure age. And when people wish to express their evil nature, the weaponry available makes no corner of the world safe. Well, that's the good news, friends. So anyway, I said to Swamiji, if you're going to come back, I said, because we're all going to have to come with you, let's wait till Satya Yuga. Let's wait till a higher age. Swami's first response, which he later repudiated, was, I don't intend to come back at all. Later he said like this, I know myself. He said, I know I will want to come back to help you. But and then he said, Satya Yuga is still the material plane. He said, it's not spiritual freedom. He said, the difference is people like us are in charge, is what he said. I said, you mean then the whole world is like Ananda? He said, yes. I said, well, that does sound better. He said, but it's still the material plane. It's not divine freedom. Now, what I was really talking about only is it's not merely these masters who end up taking responsibility. That responsibility spreads back to all of us, and it becomes our salvation, because our salvation is to become like them. And if their life is to greater can no love be than this, from a life of infinite joy and freedom in God, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death for the salvation of mankind, such ever has been the sacrifice of the great masters for the world. Here then is the fourth and last stage on the soul's long journey. So they come, we come. They're committed, we're committed. This is our path to freedom. Wow, really something to think about, isn't it? So we'll keep talking about it tomorrow. God bless you.